right. Well, I'm going to jump right into it with everybody today because we do actually have quite a bit to cover. And I appreciate you indulging me and listening to me in English today rather than in Spanish. I'm sure you're going to get much more out of it than if I tried to do this in my broken Spanish today. I am going to talk quite a bit about digital KYC, and specifically, I'm going to talk about a project that we worked on down here in Latin America, where digital KYC is really the only way to solve the problem that came up in these cases. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges and then the solutions that we've got in place. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today about digital identity and how it relates to banking and fintech, particularly here in Latin America. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a case study that we worked on at the national level here in Latin America, where a Latin American nation was launching a new financial and fintech project. And it's something that gathered national attention and national news. And so as a result of it, there was quite a bit of spotlight around the work. There was a lot of challenges around the project itself. It included onboarding millions of users in a very short period of time, defending against the kinds and levels of fraud that are endemic to financial products, and particularly digital financial products. And then finally, this was migrating a user base that was very used to face-to-face transactions, working in cash, typically very little access to digital financial services and banking, and instead migrating them into a digital mobile use case. And as a result of that, everything that they were working with needed to be naturally easy and very intuitive for them to use because they had never been through these kinds of services before. Traditional KYC that most banks and financial services players have in today really weren't up to the requirements of a use case like this, where in a digital experience, users expect their experience to be like it is in Uber, where when they do something, they get an instantaneous feedback and response. And many of us know traditional banking onboarding, it certainly doesn't respond in seconds. And in many cases, the response times on onboarding can be weeks, or in even the best cases, they're days. Also, kind of traditional KYC onboarding requirements were not in any way, shape, or form up to the scale requirements. There's really no bank on the planet that's had to go through the process of trying to onboard millions of users over the period of 30 days. And then, finally, traditional onboarding tools were not up to snuff for managing the type of online and hacker-based fraud attempts and identity fraud attempts that are endemic to these kinds of platforms and tools. So after examination, digital identity was, really the only way to solve this problem. It needed to be a solution that was mobile first, so it could meet people anytime, anywhere that they were operating in an easy to use and familiar format. It needed to be based heavily on automation and tools like machine learning and computer vision that takes advantages of capabilities both on the mobile device, as well as the more powerful algorithms that can be run inside of the cloud to work together in concert to improve things like automated pass rate, as well as fraud prevention. And then, because you're working on very large scale in a very specific area, you have the capability to custom design the solutions based on both local limitations and local opportunities. And so examples of limitations that you might run into is, for example, the quality of mobile devices, or the availability of mobile data networks, or the quality of those networks in certain areas or regions. Advantages that you may have is access to local data sources, or the ability to spend time fine-tuning technology around specific identity documents or around specific demographic characteristics. So the speed was critical in a solution like this, and by using things like machine learning and computer vision and automated tools on the back end, we were able to achieve over a 99% ID validation automated complete rate. And so what that meant for the customer is they were able to get results in less than 15 seconds for 100% of records and less than 10% seconds for 90% of records, meaning that people were able to get online in a real-time flow effectively instantaneously. And for those cases that went to manual review, we were able to dramatically reduce the number of cases as well as the average time for manual review. You know, typically manual review on a record can take between minutes and in some cases up to an hour. And we tuned that down to an average of less than 10 seconds a record. Fraud issues can come up in government services. There are a lot of people out there that want to defraud the government. And, you know, in this use case, we saw that at peak, as many as 30% of the attempted signups were fraudulent, where people were trying to take advantage of the services that the government was providing. And the risk to the client at this time was as much as $1 million a day. And so this was a serious problem that needed, you know, real solutions in place. The automated tools were actually able to catch 100% of suspected fraud and to escalate those potential fraud cases to agent for manual review. So when you combine this with the previous automation, good users were able to get immediate access in 10 to 15 seconds, while bad users got blocked out. There are additional considerations that come into play as well as a result of working with the government. The first is you can end up with a lot of players involved in the project. And that's both in the government itself and in terms of other service providers that you're working with and you're interacting with. This can lead to a lot of siloing of data, as well as difficulty in communication and staying in sync between the various organizations. Similarly, there's typically a lot of moving parts with a lot of integrations between other organizations, and sometimes not even organizations that you have direct communication with. Timelines can be very driven by optics and by public communications around what dates things are going to be delivered. And that can be very different than things that you see in typical engagements where there may be other determinations around when the MVP is going to go live. And then finally, you know, when you're dealing in these kinds of projects, politics can always come into play. This is always something that can end up both extending certain things along the project, but also causing priorities to very quickly change as a result of things like news articles or Twitter conversations that can actually drive and change priorities in a project, requiring things to get done on a much shorter timeline. I missed a slide here around scale is missing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about scale too before we move on. You know, this is something that had a totally different scale than traditional onboarding requirements for things like banks or other typical things. You know, typically you'll onboard users over, you know, months or years. And if you're building up to millions of users from zero, you know, it may take a year or 2 years to get to that first million users, giving you a lot of time to work out your issues around scalability, security, and other issues. When things are getting pushed as frankly, a government-related service, you can onboard a very large percentage of the population in a very, very short period of time. So in a typical KYC or AML arrangement, when you're onboarding users, you'll typically see, you know, onboarding rates that might be at a very fast company at the rate of, you know, 1 or 2 people that you're onboarding every minute. In this use case, we would see peaks of maybe 15 signups every second, sustained for hours at a time. And so it had a completely different scale where we were processing, more than 100,000 records in a given hour during peak periods, allowing us to onboard masses of users in very short periods of time, while still maintaining those high speeds that we talked about before in the previous slides that we operated in. So, the conclusion around this and some of the things that you see, clearly automated KYC and onboarding is the only way to go in engagements like this that have high scale, high speed, and high security requirements. It's important to get onboarding right, because onboarding is going to be your first impression with your customer. So if they either have difficulty getting onto the solution or the wrong person gets access to their account, both of those are going to cause bad impressions that are going to last for a long time. And so choosing the right partner is going to be the key to success in these kinds of projects. And finally, because of the point that above around onboarding being the first impression and being able to choose the right partner is a key to success, the earlier you can start planning this in your process, the more likely you are to be able to avoid painful and costly mistakes as you're building things out, launching them, and servicing your customers and projects. So from here, I think we can go into any questions that came up. Let me stop sharing. Did we have any questions? Oh, okay. We don't have any questions.
Justin, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your expertise. I think the work you're doing at Netkey is incredible.
Thank you, Santi. It was great to be here today.
Best of wishes for your journey. And I will make a quick takeaway but I will make it in Spanish, so it's easier for everyone. But it was a great talk. Y el pequeño takeaway que quiero hacer de nuevo como tecnólogo es Justin hizo foco en el riesgo, y el riesgo para banca no voy a descubrir yo, que es lo principal. Y de nuevo, hacer el foco, Justin decía, elegir el right partner, pero para poder elegir el right partner hay que tener el know-how, hay que tener el capital para poder evaluar, entender cómo funcionan, el expertise de los partners. Entonces, en esta era en la que los bancos tienen que aprender, además de contratar, tienen que aprender, y es fundamental. Estoy seguro que Justin estaría de acuerdo conmigo, y para poder aprovechar al máximo socios como Netkey o cualquier otro que vamos a ir descubriendo durante el día, el capital y el know-how técnico y la capacidad de experimentar es fundamental. Thank you again, Justin, for your time and your participation.
It looks like we got a question to come in. I'll go ahead and answer that one quickly. We have various places where we work with blockchain technology, primarily through the partners that we work with. So we're typically a service provider for people operating in blockchain and crypto versus actually utilizing it at the core of our own services. That said, we do work with numerous companies that are using digital identity on blockchain as the way to get the identity into the blockchain. So for example, we work with companies that operate in the securities space, like Polymesh Network, to help them whitelist investors that are able to trade on their platform and on their network for various security token offerings that are offered there. We similarly do work with a platform called Vertalo that does similar things to that. We also work with various different blockchain organizations that are using verified credentials on blockchain, so using decentralized identity with DIDs and verifiable credentials, where either we'll deliver results to them which they will then turn into a verifiable credential that goes into a decentralized identity wallet. In some cases, we'll actually issue the claim for them and then manage the life cycle of that verified credential throughout the life cycle. How easy is it to adapt our solution to local regulations? So the answer to that one is 99% of the time it's really easy. Most regulations globally are not the same, but they're very similar. So because we've built a certain amount of flexibility into our platform already, there's certain things we'll turn on or turn off based on the specific regulation that applies. And frankly, being able to set up and tune the platform is an important part of any client setup process. There are, for example, though, some jurisdictions that'll have like a strange requirement that can sometimes make it very difficult. One of the ones that comes up pretty regularly is if you're a financial services provider in the Caymans. It may have changed recently, but for a long time, if you had a copy of a document, which is what we do, we scan a copy of your document to start the process. Well, that document would have to be something called a certified true copy, which required basically a lawyer or a notary public to write a little note saying, yeah, this is really the document. Well, that's really hard to do in an automated process, to bring in a person to actually do something, especially remotely over a device. So like for that specific case, it became difficult to adapt our technology. We still did it for a couple of clients, but it was pretty hard. That's actually about the only use case I can think of where it's been difficult to adapt local regulations. Everything else has been more a matter of just turning some knobs and tuning things, frankly, mostly to make sure that you're not seeing too much data that overwhelms you with false positives and manual work. Sure. So some of the differences between digital identity and biometrics. Biometrics are one part of your digital identity. So like your fingerprint or your face match or things like that will be one part of the way that one portion of what your digital identity is. And frequently those pieces of it will be used for things like authentication, right? You use your fingerprint on your phone or your face to open your phone, or to open a door, you'll put your hand in it. But then digital identity is larger than that. It also contains other characteristics about you. It can include things like legal identity, right? What's your name? What was your birth date? What's your citizenship? It could include demographic data about you. It could include reputation data about you. It could include health data about you. Your digital identity is really everything that's about you personally that's represented in a digital form. In most cases, people think about legal digital identity and things like, what's your legal identifier, and tying that to biometrics and things like that. But as we go forward, and particularly as we see an advance in the usage of these W3C verifiable credentials and blockchain identity, we're going to see digital identity much more broadly in the future. And I think we're going to see a lot more than that. Wow, for us, what's the role of machine learning in our offer? We use machine learning throughout what we do. We use it, particularly we use computer vision and machine learning, and we use it for forensic examination of documents. So we do visual inspection of documents to look at security features like holograms and microtext. We look for tamper evidence to see if someone tried to change out the photo or the text areas and things like that. And then also for all the biometric stuff that we do. So live check, for face match, for other biometric work we do, that's all done with computer vision and machine learning. Cool. Well, this was a fun conversation, everybody. Thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it.
It gets so much better when you have questions from the public, right?
For sure. It's definitely awesome to see engagement.
Absolutely. Thank you you generated that. So thank you so much, Justin, and best of success for you and Netkey.